Today, I will answer a question that I'm often asked. Is it true that pharaohs married their sibling? Yes, indeed, they did, but not all the time. And we're going to see why they practiced incest and why there was nothing scandalous about it in ancient Egypt. In Egypt, the king always tried to show and prove that he was not an ordinary man, but rather closer to the gods than to his humble subjects. This is why he wore several crowns, had not one but 5 names written in cartouche to highlight his status, and claimed to be the son of the gods. The last point makes all the difference. If a king compared himself more easily to gods than to men, he would logically represent himself like the gods, with a false beard to resemble Osiris and scepters that symbolized his power, which originally came from the gods. Following the same reasoning, he would also adopt their behavior. In one of the world's creation myths, we learn that Atum, the god of the sun, masturbated, and from his semen were born the twins Shu and Tefnut. Shu became the god of air, while Tefnut became the goddess of moisture. Even though they were siblings, they got married and bore 2 children, Geb, who became god of the earth, and Nut, goddess of the sky. According to the myth, at that time, the sky and the earth were stuck to each other, and because they spent all day every day together, Geb and Nut ended up falling in love and getting married against the wishes of their grandfather Atum. In his rage, Atum cast a spell on his granddaughter so she would not be able to have children, and ordered his son Shu to separate Geb and Nut. This is why, ever since then, the air separates the sky from the earth. However, another deity, Thoth, found a trick to undo the curse hanging over Nut. That is how she was able to bear 5 children: Osiris, Set, Isis, Nephthys, and a less-known god with the head of a falcon called Horus the Elder. Later on, Osiris would marry his sister Isis, with whom he had the son Horus, and Set would marry Nephthys, but their marriage remained childless. So such unions are typical of gods that ancient Egyptians held up as models. Besides, how could the ancients be offended by the practice of incest? First of all, they were not aware of the degenerative diseases caused by inbreeding, and secondly, the gods, their models, have been practicing it for several generations. So yes, a pharaoh could marry his sister or half-sister, and there was nothing morally offensive about it from an ancient point of view. However, this practice was particularly shocking to the 19th century and early 20th century Egyptologists, since they could not imagine that the ancient Egyptian civilization, so advanced in several fields, openly indulged in incest. They prefer to assume that the marriages were symbolic and platonic. Despite their disbelief, many written records exist confirming that these marriages were indeed real and consummated. In the Old Kingdom, first major era in Egyptian history, we know, for example, that the kings Jedephra and probably Pepi II married their sisters. In the second intermediate period, then in the New Kingdom, the king's second Henry Tao, his son Kamoz, his other son Amos, who ascended to the throne when his brother died, and grandson Amenhotep I, all married one or several of their sisters or half-sisters. Thutmose II married his half sister Hatshepsut, whose extraordinary fate led to her being crowned pharaoh shortly after the death of her half brother. Following the same tradition, Tutankhamun also married one of his half sisters. The practice continued under the Lajids, a Greek dynasty that went on to rule Egypt until the tragic death of its last king, Ptolemy XV. His mother, the famous Queen Cleopatra VII, began by marrying a half-brother Ptolemy XIII, who died in a naval battle led against his sister's troops, since Cleopatra was fighting for power. Later, to stay in power, the queen was forced to marry her other half-brother, Ptolemy XIV, who she eventually poisoned so that she could finally rule alone. From the earliest days in the history of pharaohs until their downfall, the desire for royal power kept the tradition of incest alive, because this what was major god did. Geb, the first divine pharaoh, and his son Osiris, who succeeded him and also ruled over Egypt. Earthly pharaohs were only following a tradition that their divine ancestors started.